In 1914, Ernest Shackleton and his crew set off on a journey through the Antarctic. They did this for glory, for knowledge, and to do what seemed impossible at the time, despite science, such as the bee does every time they fly. Along the way, however, their ship got stuck in the ice, and they had to move on without it, causing many problems for the expedition. The crew of the HMS Endurance, the ship that was meant to carry them all the way into history, were heroes that demonstrated incredible bravery in overcoming hardship, even before the expedition, when they were getting money, and then on the ice during their journey. And afterwards, they were overshadowed by the war and their enemies, and were given little credit that they deserved. Now, before Ernest and his crew could begin even planning too far ahead in their journey, they needed funds to achieve the academic glory that would accompany a boating journey through the Arctic. He needed this money for food, for the ship, and for other miscellaneous supplies. Ernest, the captain of the journey and the crew, calculated that he would need around £50,000 in their time, which is around $1.2 million adjusted for inflation today. He decided that he would need to obtain the funds privately from donations made by the wealthy. He had begun this process early in 1913 with little initial success. The day was saved, however, when the government offered to give him £10,000, of course providing that he could supply another £10,000 from another source. His then friend and American playwright, J.M. Barrie, gave him another £10,000, giving Shackleton the £10,000 he needed to achieve the benchmark of £20,000, which would bring him even closer to his goal. This whole process likely put a lot of stress on Shackleton, but nevertheless he persisted, and then received an unknown but generous sum of money from Janet Stancomb Wills, a wealthy tobacco heiress, and, among other donations, he eventually got to his goal. He, of course, used some of this money to buy a ship, which was later dubbed the Endurance. While he may have had some trouble, initially, getting the money he needed, he persevered and was able to get what he needed to proceed. And while it was a relatively small thing, it still gives an insight into how dedicated he was to the pursuit of knowledge, and his reliance on the government to complete it. Having a government and a public that would be willing to assist him was pretty much an essential thing in the eyes of Ernest Shackleton, our friend. He called the expedition the Imperial Transantarctic Exploration because he felt that all the people under the flag of the Union Jack would be willing to assist him. This was reflected a bit when the government of Britain, of course, gave him $10,000 to fund his trip. Shackleton also needed men to help him, but because he couldn't do it alone, and allegedly printed an ad reading, "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness. Safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in event of success." He reportedly received over 5,000 applications. After selecting the best men for the job, they set out and went on their way, which will be discussed later. When they were out, however, World War I started. The crew were unaware of this until their return, at which point the ones who were alive, and not too badly injured, went off to fight for their country. While politically he didn't quite break many barriers, we can see that he certainly used the help of the government and the people in his country to get money and to have people assist him. and they then served their country when they returned. And while overshadowed by the war, their feats in the ice were just as attention-worthy. Now, and we'll be hearing about that from Danielle Dupere, an expert on all things ice. Yeah, this is me, Danielle Dupere, everybody's favorite Italian rapper. Now, we're gonna look at what happened in the ice when the crew went around. Now, basically what happened, okay, is their ship, the Endurance, got stuck a bunch of times in the ice, 'cause the ice is thick and the ship wasn't. Now, eventually, the ship got stuck forever, and it stayed there, and they stayed in it for a while. But then, the ship sank, and what did they do with the dogs? They kept them in the dog loops, until they ate the dogs. Now, after the ship sank, they decided that they need to get back to civilization, and they did this by going to another island. Now, where did they get to this island? Well, you see, they went on an iceberg, and when they got tired of that iceberg, they went to another iceberg. Now, that's pretty cool and all, I know. But what happened after that? Well, after the iceberg was done, they took a boat, and after they took that boat, they got back to civilization, after taking a few more boat trips. Thank you, David, and this is Danielle Dupere, signing out. Thank you, Dupere, for the insightful information on what happened to them in the ice. Now, after all of that happened in the ice, the crew were largely overlooked upon their return because of World War I, which was happening at the time. It was dominating the news because wars are pretty big. Shackleton was also largely lauded by the press throughout his life until fairly recently. Because, while remembered fondly today, Shackleton had many financial troubles and he died heavily in debt. His rival, Scott, largely overshadowed him and received much more praise when he established a new record for the furthest southern latitude. His reputation lasted for many more years longer than Shackleton, and Ernest remained largely forgotten until his rediscovery, of course, when he became a role model for leadership, especially when everything goes wrong and you and your boys are abandoned in the Arctic. Now, the crew of the Endurance are remembered still, and their story is told through all different types of media, like movies, such as the one you're watching now, and books about their journey. While perhaps at the time being largely ignored, now the actions of the crew in precarious situations prove to stand the test of time, and they are now immortalized in all sorts of media. Now, we're going to hand it off to Dupere once again to see us off and give us a conclusion. Thank you, David. It's me, Danielle Dupere, back again with the hottest new Antarctic updates. Now, as Murphy's Law would have it, almost everything that would go wrong did go wrong. At every turn of the journey, when they were getting money, they didn't get much money until the government helped them out. And then they had to rely heavily on the public people for money and for people, okay? And even after that, on the ice, they still had a bunch of stuff that wasn't happening, and it was all going bad. And then after that, once it all was over, when they got back, they were ignored by everybody. And then Scott, I hate Scott, he was known instead of Shackleton. The men who were living through these hardships should be regarded as heroes who overcame difficulties in all aspects of their expedition, getting money and men and then in the ice. And finally, when they got back, they weren't given any of the credit that they deserved. This is Danielle Dupere, signing out. Thank you, Dupere, and thank all of you for listening. And I think the person who can sum this whole story up for us best is our friendly lizard, motivational lizard, who once said,
"Don't leave anything up to chance." I believe in you, pal. We all believe in you. You're a winner, kiddo. And don't you ever forget it.